before we even got into the test, they already had chemistry out in the waiting room, So I knew. So they're gonna be together, and then the two brothers. The two brothers was hard finding the right that kind of look at each other, the right skin tone, and so forth. But I was lucky, yeah.
I do not like horror films normally, but the exception to the rule for me is I love a good vampire film. I don't know
Oh
why.
yeah.
Vampires, I'm like, I'm not great with like anything else, but I love vampire films. And it was really nice to see the Vietnamese culture embracing in this in your film. You know, Daydreamers, it blends like a Vietnamese folklore with the vampire genre. So, what was the inspiration for you to actually merge these two worlds together for your film?
Yeah, no, good question. I never intended or set out to do a vampire movie. Obviously, growing up in America, watched a lot of movies, including vampires, and it's just like I love vampires. I remember the very first one I saw was around 1979 or something as a kid, and it was called Prince of Darkness, Dracula. It was the one with Christopher Lee, with the cape and the slick back hair, sleeping in the coffin. You kill him with the stake. So I thought all vampires, Dracula, that was the traditional, right? I was like, okay, that was how it was all, and it scared the hell out of me. And then later in life, when I was in high school or something, I saw The Lost Boys. I don't know if you remember The Lost Boys.
You know what?
Um,
That's actually a favorite, an oldie.
yeah, so when I saw that as a teenager, dealing with teen angst, and those were vampires living on the outskirts of society. And I grew up in Sunnyvale, which is really near Santa Cruz where they filmed. So I remember all the boardwalk and the location. So then it had a different impact on me. I'm like, oh, okay. Vampires or Dracula is a way in to tell stories about marginalized characters who live within the cracks of society in the shadows. So living in Vietnam all these years, the last 5, 6, 7 years of making films there, trying to find inspiration for something to do, my next project. And, growing up in America as a young child and, coming here in 75, right when the war ended, my only depiction of Vietnamese faces on the screen were in films like Rambo or Platoon, and we were called gooks. So I was very confused. Wait, I'm the enemy? Because that's what I saw projected on the screen. So the way I dealt with that was I didn't accept being Vietnamese. I had Filipino friends, so it's easier for me to say I was Filipino so I didn't get teased. I merged in. Even the Filipino kids were teasing me. So I just said, no, I'm one of you guys, as a kid. And then, when I went to Vietnam in 95 for the first time, I realized, whoa, my perception changed. We're not the enemy, you know? And so then a few years ago during COVID, I wanted to make a movie talking about family divides, self-identity. And the vampire, for some reason, was the way in for me to tell that story about family, about people living on the edge of society, about self-identity, as in the film, one of the characters wants to be his true self of who he is. I'm a vampire. I don't want to hide in the shadows anymore. I want to be who I am. But society doesn't allow him because if they find out who he is, they're going to castrate him. So it's kind of like how the inspiration kind of all started. But it really probably went back embedded in me since I was a young kid trying to find my own identity.
I would love to know what your approach to redefining, the vampire mythology through a Vietnamese cultural lens. Like, what new elements did you want to introduce as opposed to like the things that we're used to in our everyday vampire movies here in the US?
I wanted to tip things in order the intention of the movie was to make it for the local market first, meaning in Vietnam. So I had to find a way in. That way in was to create the backstory, the lore, when the European how European vampires got chased out of Europe because once you show yourself who you are, you get chased out. They migrated with the traders of Portuguese in the 16th, 1500 to come to Vietnam and the French. So I kind of used that um, historical fact to create the backstory. And because of that, and Vietnam has been a country where so many invaders came in, and Vietnam had to fight or defeat, starting from China, the Mongols, the French, and then the Americans. So same thing with the European vampires, but some stayed behind, you know. And then, I don't know if you remember, but in the third act of the movie, towards the end, there's a big painting in Marco's house, and is of a Frenchman standing next to Marco. So he used to be a servant for the Frenchman. So that's how long he's been alive. Um, so that was kind of my way in. But also, I had to keep in mind this was for a local audience, so I wanted to keep to the basic, simple elements of vampires. No sunlight, no sunlight. I added this very classic, the silver bullet, and the no reflection. You know, and these are things that to a local audience they're not familiar, but they're simple enough that I hope to be able to digest. And of course, you know, blood, they're getting it from the fish market, those things like that. You know, I had a scene where, you know, certain food, you know, from the blood, but I try to keep it that, and the focus mainly is on Vietnamese is very family oriented, so try to really keep it on the family dynamic and how the curse divides and breaks up the family.
You know, I find this so fascinating because obviously I'm American. And so knowing how much I know so much about vampire folklore,
Yes.
hearing it from your perspective as a filmmaker and thinking about it from an audience that is really being just kind of introduced to this, it's fascinating to
Yeah,
me.
thanks. Yes.
You know, the visual tone of Daydreamers is both haunting and very poetic. I would love for you to talk a little bit about your collaboration with your cinematographer to kind of shape that aesthetic.
Yeah, you know, so one of the things for censorship, you know, even though I'm Vietnamese, but I'm Vietnamese American. So in Vietnam, I'm a foreigner. Um, so I have to get my projects passed through censorship. So one of the things in censorship is always like, well, if you're gonna do a movie, a ghost movie, a horror movie, vampire movie, you can't say it's one of the notes I got back, you can't say it's in Saigon, you can't say it's in Ho Chi Minh City. So those things that I think was in the dialogue early on, but I took it out. So
Okay.
part of my visual effects was I recreated the entire environment. So a lot of the buildings you see at night and were all CG later. We erased, like when they're driving in the motorcycles to the big city, all those skyscrapers are all CG. We took out what was there and replaced it. So as a local audience, you're watching it, you're like, wait, it looks Vietnam, but where are we? So that was the whole effect. I wanted to create a universe that is familiar yet unfamiliar. And that was kind of the approach with the production design, also with the cinematographer. Vietnamese at night has a lot of fluorescent lights, and we were trying to, how do we light this to make it feel kind of like that urban decay at night with the fluorescent lights? um, keep keep lights, let it spill off into the darkness, and a lot of subtle visual effects. Like Vietnam, when I shot this, did not have a subway. We have it now, but when you see the subway car drive by and stuff, that was things we put in early on to throw the audience off. Like, where are we? So that's kind of all these little details that help make up this kind of tapestry of Saigon or Vietnam that people wouldn't have been familiar with at the time.
You know, you have Chi, who is a superstar. Like, can you talk to me about what it was like trying to cast your vampires and, were they familiar at all with, vampire lore when you were auditioning them?
A little bit. Yeah, I think most of them a little bit here and there. Like Twilight is all, you know, everywhere I go, they go, oh yeah, we know vampires, Twilight. That's the main thing, you know. And that's if you're like a cinephile or something, you might have seen some other ones. Um, but it was very difficult. Really wasn't sure I could make this film in Vietnam because Marco to me was the most difficult character to cast, the older brother. And I always said, if I couldn't find Marco, then I don't have a movie. I had to find, you know, he's the older brother. He had, you know, be extremely handsome, the mystique. Also, he has that extremely vulnerable. Um, so there's so many elements of it. And then not only that, now you have to find people that can look like they're part of a family, you know. So the casting process took months. I told the cast director we uh, turn over every stone. You know, we called in newcomers, established actors, a lot of hip hop stars, rappers. We tried everything. And then once I narrowed things down to like the top five of each, I did a mix and match, like camera test. Okay, you will read with her, and her. You read, you know, just trying to find the right combination. And then once the right combination comes together, it's automatic chemistry and you know it. And that was the most important thing I was looking for. Do they have chemistry with each other? So when Shipu, she's a big pop star in Vietnam, sat with Marco Twin. Before we even got into the test, they already had chemistry out in the waiting room, you know. So I knew. So they're gonna be together. And then the two brothers was hard finding the right that kind of look at each other, the right skin tone, and so forth. But I was lucky, yeah.
How has working on this film changed the way that you view horror or as your role as a storyteller?
It's not my first horror. I did a horror film 3 years ago called The Housemaid, and we sold it to IFCs, released by IFC Films in the U.S. So I'm not. I have a couple other horror projects. For me, it's not about the genre of the horror. It's the subject matter. What is the project? What do I have to say? How do I find it that the characters are personal to me or the story is personal? But I've always loved horror. I love watching it because they scare me. You know, I've seen so many my most recent one was Smile 2 and Heretic.
No, no,
Yeah.
I can't
Have you
wait.
seen Smile, the first one?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Look, I'm already getting, you're talking about it. I'm getting,
Yeah. No, I love going to the theaters, but my friends don't like to go with me because they go, Tim, you scream so freaking loud.